because I see a lot of messages at the bottom saying that there is no audio. So I just wanted to confirm if I'm audible. All right,
Okay, I
great.
think there must have been something wrong with my mic. Sorry, but I'll just repeat what I said. So, as mentioned before, in case any of the audience members have any questions during the presentation, they can feel free to write them down at the in the text box below in the bottom left-hand side of their screen, and then Jojo, you can answer them as in when you stop for questions.
All right. So I'm not sure if my introduction was kind of heard, but in any case, I'll just give a very short overview of what I do. Um, so I'm basically the CEO and founder of this company called Notch, which is into the recruitment space, where our approach is really re-looking at how recruitment is done using data, using lots of digitization, and using algorithms. That's the base of what we do. But this is not a sales pitch for Notch, so I'll stay away from that. Just very, very quickly, I just want to tell you about how I got into this. My background is not in recruitment, so I'm not a traditional recruiter or a headhunter. I came about it largely through a point that I felt while I was working with lots of organizations. I've worked with startups for the last 10, 15 years. In between, I've joined a few corporate jobs, worked there as well. And at each stage, I was required to build a team, right? So that's been that's been the only constant in what I've done over the last 15, 17 years, where at each stage, the process starts again. In most of those cases, I've either been part of the team handling some part of onboarding a new colleague, looking out for someone, spreading the word, or in the later years, basically being responsible for building a team from scratch. The most recent example was perhaps the most frustrating as well, which was as recent as 2015, where I was required to kind of build this company up from scratch. We were a three-member team trying to do a lot of things. The good thing was that we had access to a shared resource of a larger company where we had access to a full recruiting team, right? So there was a three-member recruiting team that would basically kind of take our requirements and send us CVs, in return. So when it started off, it felt really good, where I'm like, okay, I have this shared resource. I can use, a few hours of their time every week. And what we found, however, was that no matter how detailed I gave my inputs and my requirement, what I would get back is basically lots of CVs. And then I found myself spending half my week going over CVs, rejecting most of them, saying that they're not suitable. There was a lot of frustration that's getting built up because the HR person was like, but hang on, this is what you asked for. And then, reluctantly, I'd be like, okay, you know what, let's just shortlist a few and at least meet these guys. I was spending a lot of time in unproductive interviews where those interviews should not have actually been scheduled. And that's when I realized that there is something drastically different now versus when I had initially started kind of recruiting 8 to 10 years ago. And I wasn't able to put a finger on exactly what had changed, but I started kind of observing this a lot more closely. And then I started asking friends, my colleagues who are, also building teams or leading organizations, saying that, do you face a problem in recruitment and what really is the problem? Um, that is going to form the basis of what I'll be covering over the next 30, 40 minutes, right? So let me get started. So what I've done is, we've kind of broken down the subject into basically saying, let's look at recruitment in the development sector, though, in case, these are some problems that are not unique to the development sector. They're also faced by other organizations, more small than large, and we'll try and find some of the common solutions to these challenges. So what I've done is I've just broken it down into four broad sections. One is just a recruiting overview, just so that we get a sense of what we're talking about, how to structure it, etc. Then we'll go down to some of the common challenges as I've understood after talking to 30, 40 organizations, looking at the root causes and seeing what we can do about it. right? So let's start with the recruiting overview. But before that, it'll just be good to get a sense of how involved is the audience over here. And I see there are about 17 people in the attendee list. It'll be good to get a sense of how deeply you all are involved in recruiting and what role you all play within your organization. So I can tailor the next 30 minutes to that. So Ada, could you help me with just putting out a survey and getting a sense of everyone's role in recruiting? Yeah, so we'll just take a break. We'll pause for about a minute. There are four simple good questions over here. It'll just be good to understand your organization, on what kind of work your organization does, and the sector. How large is your organization, and finally, the role that you play in recruitment within your organization. So I think we'll just pause for about 30-40 seconds more and get inputs from everyone.
So let's wait about 10 more seconds. I think we're just waiting on two more people to finish giving this the survey, and then I'll be sharing the results with everyone.
Great. A quick question, Ada. Can we just see the size of the organization, etc.? How do we see the drill down results on this?
Jojo, I think you'll be able to see them now. It'll say, if you just click on the summary of the results, do you see that option?
Yeah, so I can see the summary of the results, but I'm not getting a sense of this, the sectors or the size of the organization. So I don't get that. Okay, so we've got kind of the results in, so that gives me a fair idea of the size of organizations. So just for everyone's benefit as well, we've got people from organizations right from the early single digits to about 150 and 500. So that's the range that we're talking about. So I'll try and which is in the kind of startup micro to and a mid a small size SME organization, which is perfect, right? So I'm guessing that some people already have a structured HR department, whereas others are basically multitasking and performing the HR function themselves, right? So let's move on. I'm reading the questions on the side as we talk. So we can take the questions right at the end. In case there is a specific question that is kind of very relevant to the current slide, I'm happy to pick it up and basically answer that as well, right? Okay, so what I've done is in the recruiting overview, there are multiple ways in which we can slice and dice this, right? So you can look at right from employer branding to onboarding to employee feedback, etc., etc. There are multiple ways of looking at it. For the sake of this presentation, I've just broken it down into the three most tangible things that I think we can spend the next half an hour on. Broadly, we can look at sourcing, we can look at screening, and then we can look at how you actually select someone, right? These are also things that I think have the largest impact on getting the right people and building, your right teams. So on the sourcing part of it, again, there are multiple ways that you can slice and dice this. The two broad categories are basically, and this is a little bit of industry jargon, which says there's inbound sourcing and there's outbound sourcing, right? So inbound sourcing, for those who are not familiar, it's really useful when you are looking at a role where you have a fair idea of function, you know what the person is going to do, but you don't know how to find them, right? So this is essentially what you should be doing over here in inbound, is trying to cast your net as wide as possible, right? So you should be looking at all job boards, you should be looking at personal networks, your social networks, you should be advertising the job. So this really is a really good strategy to follow organization wide, right? So the inbound strategy generally is led by the HR team, where they put in place the process and saying that, okay, we're continuously going to be looking for talent because the need could arise at any point in time, and at that stage we don't want to be scrambling to find whoever is available. So that's one. This also works really well when you know that you are a growing organization, right? Where you know that, okay, today I'm looking for a manager, and tomorrow the manager would be supported by, say, a few executives. So I might as well start the process now and start strengthening my basically my net to attract these people. The other broad categorization is outbound. Now this works pretty well when you have a very clear, specific understanding of that. There are some unique skills that you are looking at. The difference is, say, in the first case, you're looking at a partnerships manager, right? In inbound, or you're looking at a marketing manager. Whereas in outbound, you're saying, okay, I'm looking for a marketing manager, but this person should have these very specific skills, right? Saying that, okay, this is the kind of personality I'm looking at. They should have spent 13 years doing this very specific product, which is slightly more difficult if you go via the inbound route. Largely outbound is a good strategy when you know that you're looking for someone to join your leadership team, right? And it's not like inbound doesn't work for leadership team. It's just that outbound is used more effectively in leadership. It's used more effectively where you think that people may not want to kind of apply to your firm, and they expect you to kind of reach out to them, etc., right? And hence it's also very short term. It's a very need based solution. The problem with outbound is generally it becomes a little more expensive because you're hiring like a retained consultant, or you're hiring a headhunter, etc. Again, works well for leadership. I would not advise this as a general strategy for firms. So these are just some sources that I put as a visual, right? The most effective that we've seen for organizations over a long period of time is your own website, where you end up getting the most relevant kind of people. So you must look at strategies of leveraging this to the maximum. For growing organizations, employee referrals are fantastic because they really have a good sense of the kind of networks that they are in, people doing similar kind of roles, have similar interest areas, etc. Social media is very, very effective as well, because not everyone is onto job boards looking for a job. But if you think that the job is attractive enough, I think this is something that all employees should be leveraging. Go put out a job, go onto social media, spread the word. Your next hire could really just be, a tweet away. They could be on Facebook just looking at a post, right? So these are very, very free forms of really publicizing the job. We always encourage organizations to spend a lot of time, publicizing their advertised roles via employees and via on the social network. It should be actually socialized within the organization. It cannot be just the responsibility of the HR people to go out and put up a tweet and a Facebook post. That is generally only marginally effective. What's really effective is if everyone in the organization, or at least the team, goes out there and spreads the word. So that really, really works well for organizations that understand the role. Okay, I see someone who's saying they're unable to hear. Can you just have like a message from someone if I'm audible, just so that I know that y'all can hear me? Okay, great. So yeah, so I've just heard back from Anil saying I'm audible. Fine, right? And the last is job boards. Again, we'll go down to how people kind of select job boards, etc., a little later. But as a broad guideline, the only constraint that there should be on advertising on a job board, especially in the Indian scenario, is only your budget, right? I would say you have a budget, and don't restrict yourself to one job board or the other based on anecdotal evidence, right? That has, in fact, we have data to prove that that doesn't work, right? What you need to do is just go out there and post jobs. A lot of them are free, some of them are paid, most of them are not very expensive, right? So that's something that you should be looking at. So moving on from sourcing, once you've kind of spread your net wide, and you know that there are enough people who have kind of seen the job, you've got a few hundred applicants, that's a good time to start thinking about how you want to screen these applicants now. The four most common ways, right? The most common way really is looking at CVs. People essentially load the CVs, spend some time, spend a lot of time, in fact, just creating a list of, in three broad categories: shortlisted, rejected, maybes, right? So that's what we've seen as practice when we were kind of setting up the company. We took a lot of evidence from HR people on how they actually go about screening. This is also the feedback that we got, the most painful part of the entire recruiting process, right? I'd love to get a show of hands if that is really what y'all have faced as well. So you can just kind of continue typing so that I just get some kind of a feedback on whether people who've screened actually feel the pain. Yes, so we see from Falak that's a good yes with an exclamation. Yes, that was my experience as well when I was looking at a lot of CV screening, etc. It's just an endless process, and after a while, everything just starts seeming to be similar, right? You're seeing the same kind of keywords. Broadly, what ends up happening is you go with what you recognize, right? Because there's just such a ton of things to go through. The next way that people use is basically looking at tools that the job boards themselves will provide. Some of them do that, some of them don't provide it. Like if you go to a Naukri, you'll see some very basic filtering tools. If you go Indeed, again, you'll see some basic filtering tools. The problem with this really is that you're filtering on different portals, right, which is not really productive. However, this option is available where people just broadly filter by either their current salaries or CTCs, or they filter by years of experience, etc. That is one form of screening, not very effective, but people do that. The third form really of screening is assessments, where where organizations use assessments as a form of screening. It's being used. In my personal opinion, assessments are more effective at the next stage while you are interviewing and selecting, rather than as an elimination process, right? Because there's just a lot of time and energy that's gone into it. Plus, anyone who can solve a questionnaire doesn't mean that the person is suitable, right? So I think it's better to kind of screen first and then do assessments rather than the other way around. But the reality is that a lot of people are doing assessments at the screening stage. And finally, a small number of people have started, and this is generally happens in the tech world, but nevertheless, it is a screening technique where they use some form of gamification to screen. Personally, I find it a little gimmicky, right? Where it may work for really entry level people to gauge their interest, like saying that okay, I've got 1,000 people, 1,000 people who've applied for the position of an intern. How do I kind of or whittle it down to a more manageable number? So the gamification works there. Gamification also works in things like your tech hiring, etc. Again, at a junior level, right? So these are some of the broad screening techniques, though most people end up using the first and the second, which is CV screening and filtering. The third stage is largely on selection. Now here, most organizations would basically go down the interview route, right, where you would want to interview the person. Some organizations still have group discussions, which I think are fantastic, because you're able to kind of get in a lot of people at the same time, have a discussion, have multiple aspects of kind of evaluating them, rating them, etc. Consulting firms, investment banks, and a lot of other organizations as well go down your case interview format, which is also very, very effective. This is basically you're giving the applicant what they would do in a real world scenario. There are some organizations who also give assignments remotely, right? Where so a case basically generally happens in person, live, where you're trying to not look at the answer as much as you're trying to understand the approach, right? And you're kind of testing the person on different kinds of skills. What you're looking at is articulation. What you're looking at is structuring. You're looking at numeracy. So a case helps there. Assignments are generally more effective when you're looking at a very specific skill. Right. So this is, I would kind of club assignments with the assessments that are being used in screening. I would kind of put assessments here at the selection stage, where it's great to kind of get a small short list of people and then give them an assignment saying that, okay, you claim to know how to do, say if you're looking at an accounting function, can you solve this assignment? Or if you're looking at someone who's good at Excel, who's good at data manipulation, saying that, okay, here's a test, can you kind of do it? So this is really, really good. Ideally, a combination of these four. So these four are not mutually exclusive. That's your interviews, your group discussions, cases, and assignments. I think you need to pick and choose one or two or three of them depending on what your specific requirement is. So that's a really broad, generic overview of these three functions in recruitment. And we'll kind of spend time on the common challenges here. Again, let's take a short kind of survey again. Ada, if you can help me here, it'll just be good to understand what kind of challenges people in this audience, organizations in this audience are facing, and then it'll be good feedback for me as well to see whether they are in line with what we've observed with the organizations that we've worked in, with the organizations that we've reached out to, right? So there are 4 or 5 very simple just good to kind of get your feedback. Let's take a break for 30-40 seconds and see if we can get the survey results in. Okay, so we have, so I think everyone's kind of participated in the survey. So let's just have a look at this. I'm guessing the screen is visible to everyone, right? On the summary, 70% people participated, which is representative enough, right? So let's look at, okay. So the highest is on the sourcing challenges, right? So there's 68% people who basically said that sourcing is at some way a problem. So 18% have said that sourcing, there are just too many candidates. Okay, that's definitely a problem, especially if you're in HR. Others, 50%, so that's about half the crowd, thinks that you're getting too few relevant candidates. So, right, the key operative word over here being relevant. That's great. That is pretty much what the rest of the country also, I think, is going through. Where it's really surprising. So another kind of interesting statistic on this is for graduate jobs in 2011. So I'm just digressing a bit, but for graduate jobs in 2011, the government of India had done a survey where they had 11 people chasing each job, right? So that was, sorry, 9 people chasing each graduate job. They did the survey again in 2016. That's after a gap of 5 years, and that number had gone from 9 to 27, right? So you have 27 people chasing each graduate job, right? So I would actually, assume that a lot more people, if you're doing your sourcing right, almost everyone should be in this bracket, in this kind of first one, that you're sourcing too many candidates. If you're sourcing too many candidates and too few relevant candidates, yes, that is a genuine problem that everyone's facing, right? So let's look at the third one. CV screening takes too long. The function team doesn't devote the time required to screen CVs. So good, 25% are saying that. Don't blame them. There's just one of the things that they're doing, and CV screening is kind of tedious. Too many strands to handle at once. This is something that all of us face. A good 18% are saying that as well. The requirements for the role are not clear. So this is fantastic. So thanks for the survey, guys. Let's head back. So our feedback has been very, very similar across the organizations that we've met as well, right? So I'll share my experiences. This is something that we've whittled down after talking to a few dozen organizations, and right from HR teams to business owners to team leads, etc. Basically, anyone who was recruiting, we reached out to and said, okay, what is the problem on recruiting? This is even before we had formally kind of started Notch, right? So these were the issues that we were facing. At the top of, of the kind of issues, in terms of how widespread it was basically the quantity of relevant applicants, right? So at one end, we had people who were saying, there are just too little, there are just too few people who are applying to our jobs. Now, I must kind of qualify this. This is generally organizations where the brand isn't very well known, right? So this is something that they all faced, or they didn't really follow a method to getting the applicants, right? So they would kind of put up a job on their websites, maybe do a sporadic post in, in Naukri or on Facebook, etc., and leave it at that, and then realize that, okay, you know what, hang on, my job post is lost and I'm not getting enough applicants. That is a genuine problem for smaller organizations. It's a problem where there is no structured approach, is what we found, right? We'll come to the findings later, but I'm just kind of putting it out there here. The second problem was, which almost everyone faces, saying that we receive too many applicants and most of them are not relevant, right? So here what happens is, organizations that have gone down the route of kind of saying, okay, we are already on LinkedIn, we do have an account in Naukri, we do use Indeed and maybe say Monster or Shine or whatever. We use these job boards. The problem with these job boards is that the minute we put a job out there, we're inundated with CVs, right? And then it's a problem to go through these CVs. It's so quantity is a problem that kind of cuts both ways, is what we heard, where this it's similar sized organizations in a similar sector. We do have a lot of clients who are in the development space, so all this feedback is also from them, saying that either we're receiving too little, or there are other organizations saying we're just receiving too much and we don't know what to do about it. The second is screening CVs. This is the most acutely felt pain, right? So this is anyone who has gone through CV screening would kind of attest to the fact that it is the most painful activity to do. So what ends up happening is that because you've got to kind of go through 100 or 200 or 300 CVs, and at the back of your mind, you also don't want to leave out any potential good candidate. Mentally, you just make a map of what you're looking for, and then you tend to underweigh or overweigh what you see. So for example, if you're from Bombay and you realize, and you're looking for, say a young analyst to go and join your team, say straight out of college or maybe with a year or 2 years of experience, you tend to overweigh their you know educational institute, right? So for example, if you see someone from St. Xavier's or you see someone from IIT Bombay, these are the two most kind of spoken about colleges in Bombay that we've seen. You tend to overweigh everything else that you are reading in their CV, right? And that's not only not fair to other candidates, but it's also in most cases incorrect to what the role may demand, right? So here it's basically a familiarity bias that that's coming into play. There's no, if you're doing your CV screening manually, there is no way to avoid this. Everyone is will go through this, right? So whether you are an experienced HR person, you're an experienced team lead, you're coming into it fresh, the minute you start going down tens and 30s, the 30 CVs and processing 50 CVs at a time, everyone would kind of fall into this trap. So the third thing that we heard was that the interview to selection ratio in most organizations is too poor. This was a pain point from the functional teams or the team leads who were actually interviewing. There was a constant pushback saying that, why am I interviewing people when they're not suitable, right? And so it seemed like a unsolvable problem, because the cycle would just kind of continue, right? Saying that I need to interview more people to understand who I'm looking for and who's the best of the lot. But then the people that I'm interviewing themselves should not be there in the first place, because they don't really make the cut as per my requirement, right? So this is something that goes on, in circles between the HR team and the hiring manager, where you're just interviewing unsuitable people, right, for that role. As a result of all of this, your hidden cost per hire actually increases. where the amount of time that the HR team is spending per hire, right? And this is your cost actually on job boards, etc., is insignificant, right? You would be spending in early thousands advertising per job, maybe 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 rupees per job, advertising per job. That's not that much compared to the actual time that the HR team is spending, the hiring manager is spending, the functional team is spending in CV screening, in putting out the requirement, in actually interviewing people, where each interview lasts for about half an hour to 45 minutes or an hour. That time, cost of that time is one, it's hidden, and and two, it's way too much compared to what you're looking for, right? The last thing that we found, and this is a question that we just asked because we were thinking of solving this problem using data, is that almost in all cases, and I'm saying 90% of the cases, people did not gather data and they did not analyze what was coming through the door, right? And why was someone selected or why was someone rejected? As a result, if you were to repeat the process and you were looking at hiring someone again, maybe for the same role, maybe for a similar role or a different role, you would go through the same mistakes all over again, right? What happens in a scenario like this is you teams tend to rely on anecdotal evidence, right? Only because you've selected your first analyst from, say, St. Xavier's, right? And the next one came in from, again, say, Xavier's. You tend to fall back saying, oh, we get really, really good people from St. Xavier's. But the point is, you haven't really given a chance to others to actually make the cut, because you're looking at, it's almost like a self-selection. You're looking at CVs, you're familiar with Xavier's, you shortlist those guys, they get selected, and then you end up saying, oh, I get really good people from Xavier's. By the way, we love St. Xavier's, right? I do think that a lot of organizations have got some fantastic people from St. Xavier's, but all I'm trying to make the point over here is that you're not really basing your beliefs on data. You're basing it on anecdotal evidence, right? The same thing could be said of job boards as well, saying that, oh, we get really good candidates from LinkedIn and we get really bad candidates from Naukri. By the way, I've heard a lot of people say that we get really bad profiles from Naukri. That really is not true, because our data tells us that if you're looking for, a mid-sized generic role, there is no difference between a Naukri and a LinkedIn and an Indeed and an IM Jobs. There's literally no difference. So again, unless you have data, there's little that you can do to kind of see what's working for you, what's not, right? So we've gone through these problems, and then we kind of drilled down at each level, and we said, okay, why is sourcing such a problem, right? And we kind of looked at beyond the obvious things. What we found was that sourcing is a problem because one, the role is not clearly defined, and that really is a sourcing problem. Because if you put out generic things out there, you would get people who are generally applying, right? Without really understanding the role completely. That's one. The second is that your outreach is limited. Most organizations or most teams that we spoke to align themselves to one or two front ends, right? So they would say, we put out our jobs on LinkedIn and we put out our jobs on Naukri. And then when we asked them why, the answer almost always was, because we've got good results from there, we don't get good results from anywhere else. In reality, when you kind of probe a little deeper, what ends up happening is that the teams are so short of time and they're so generally understaffed that if they go beyond that, like if they kind of spread their net too wide, right? If they go on to the third front end and the fifth front end and the seventh front end to expand the net to get in more candidates, they don't have the time to really, do the CV screening, and hence they just kind of align themselves with one or two front ends. Someone or the other is shortlisted from there. Someone makes it through the interview, and someone obviously gets hired. And then it's like a belief system that comes into play that says, oh, we get our candidates from Naukri, or we get our candidates from LinkedIn, right? Again, we have data to prove that that's not how it works. Third is, your spends are not optimized. So while you could be spending on job posts, you really don't know which front end is working for what kind of job. Again, everyone has the figure at an aggregate level. So they do know that, okay, I spent 5,000 rupees or 7,000 rupees or 3,000 rupees in advertising this job. But what they really are not able to understand is which ones of these were really relevant. What's my cost of, what's my cost of view? What's my cost of per action? What's my cost of a relevant shortlisted candidate? So they're not looking at this cost from those metrics, which is almost like putting a marketing lens onto recruitment. Again, I say this with completely empathizing with the HR teams, because that is just too much to do for a small, a 2-member, 3-member team. Third, they're looking at, it's a very, very small pool of relevant candidates that they need to select from, and which is also why your sourcing doesn't work. The second thing, when we said, okay, why doesn't screening work, is what our understanding was that it's really the format on how you are accepting your applications has a role to play on how effective the screening is, right? So because almost all applications are accepted through CVs, you don't have a choice but to manually screen all these CVs, right? So you are either looking at your screen, a PDF file or a Word document on your screen for hours on end, or you are taking multiple printouts and going through it, right? But the issue is you are still spending a lot of time just looking at each profile without breaking it down into a more manageable data format, right? So that's one. As a result, the entire thing just becomes time consuming. As a result, it's error prone. Also, what comes into play is that most CVs may not actually have the information that you are seeking out for that specific role, and hence you need to kind of call up, do a verification over a phone, which could easily be gathered at the time of application. But just because of the format, where everyone just has a CV, a standard CV format, the information that you are looking for may not be there. So let me give you a very simple example on this. One firm that we were kind of looking at recruiting for was, for a simple position, they were looking at a young accountant to come and join their team. Seems very, very straightforward. Their experience in the past had been that they went through the cycle, they attracted a lot of CVs, they found a lot of them actually being extremely suitable. They shortlisted a few, called a few to the interview table, selected like 2 or 3 people and said, okay, we're going to make an offer to any one of them, only to realize right at the end of the process that one very specific piece of information was missing because it just wasn't there in the CVs. Now they ran a specific, they ran Tally ERP9, which is a specific version of Tally, right? And in their view, they wanted someone to join and hit the road running, right? So they did not have the time or the wherewithal to go and train this person. Turns out that the one who was shortlisted was a good accountant, had good kind of understanding of the role, but had been, in his last job, which was about 6-8 months that he'd been working on this job, was used to operating on another system and not Tally ERP9. And that came out only because that specific piece of information wasn't there in the CV, right? So here again, it's a format that determines how you're looking at someone, how you're not looking at someone. So basically, then they had to kind of repeat the process and find out who knows how to use Tally ERP9 and who doesn't know how to use it, right? So that's just a simple example of that. The third, again, here on interviewing, it's kind of, I'm moving on from what I just said, that most of your some very specific information that should be kind of captured at the application stage is not captured because it's not there in the CV. There's not adequate information in CVs to kind of understand whether this person is suitable for the role or not, which impacts your interviewing itself, right? Two, most interviews, or some interviews, I will not say most, some interviews really are too dependent on the interviewer themselves, right? So everyone has a different style of interviewing. The issue is that most organizations don't see this as a structured process. They still see this as an art form, right? Where it's like, okay, XYZ should interview for this role because they have a good knack of interviewing, which works. I'm not against using, interviewing as an art form, the downside of that is there is no objectivity in the interviewing. So while you must have your own style of interviewing, which is fine, I think the simplest thing that organizations can do is really break it down into a structured format and say, okay, these are the very specific things that we are measuring at the interview, right? Because otherwise what happens in an interview is, as anyone, like when you're meeting a person, you tend to go for people like you, right? So if I've gone to a certain kind of school, there are certain kind of likes that I like. It's there are studies that actually go and show that most people make a decision also based on how people look and how they dress, right? So that ends up influencing your decision during the interview rather than more objective criteria. So while you can kind of give allowance for how you feel about the person, I would also have very objective criteria on what you are interviewing for and how you are doing this, such that if the same interview was conducted by another person, the outcome should more or less be the same, right? And the last one is why we think the entire screening process is also sorry, the entire recruitment process is also a problem, is the lack of analytics, where you're relying on anecdotal evidence, you're relying on on just some tacit information that's kind of built in the organization over a long period of time, that, oh, we go only to these 4 campuses, or we use only these 2 front ends, or this is how we do things, without supporting it with data, right? Without supporting it with any kind of analysis. So that is something that the entire sector, I think, just needs to work on. It does really yield a lot of results. So moving on now, so we've spoken about a broad overview of recruiting. I got a sense of the kind of organizations, the size of organizations, the kind of recruiting that is going on with this, with this audience over here. 2, we went down the common challenges. It was good to get a sense of the challenges that you all face, as well as I've shared some of the challenges that we've seen with organizations that we work with, organizations that we reached out to. Then I'd just like to look at the root causes on what we've understood over the last year and a half on why is there such a mess in this entire recruiting. Like, why is it considered like the most boring, time-consuming, uninteresting thing to do, right? So this is some macro data that we gathered, just to kind of put the scale of things in India. Like, India is a very different market. It's really complex when it comes to anything with people, right? One is that hiring activity, believe it or not, is at an all-time high, right? So we just looked at the top 6 recruiting sites, and we did a very simple count, and we said every week there are 2 lakh jobs that are added, right? And millions apply to these jobs every day. So just to I mean, if you so one of the things that I frequently do, just as trying to understand human behavior, right? Travel by public transport. I do take a bus. I do take a local train, just to try and see, and this is sometimes in peak hours, just to try and see what happens when people are on their mobile phones in the morning, right? And there's I mean, it's a fun activity to do if you're into things like this. But in the morning, while they are on their jobs, there are two common activities that everyone seems to be doing on their mobile phones. One, they're all looking at stocks, right? So, and these are youngsters. Like, I don't think I looked at stocks when I was like 20 and 21, like in my first job. But most youngsters are looking at stocks. They're looking at money control. They're looking at what's moving up, what's moving down. The other bunch of youngsters are also looking at their newsletters that they are getting through these sites, right? So every morning, Naukri and LinkedIn and Indeed and Monster and Hiree and IIMjobs and multiple others, where all of them are registered on, send them their matching jobs, saying that high matching jobs for your profile. The surprise, so I also went and registered, obviously, onto these jobs, saying that, okay, so what are these guys getting? Every morning, each one of these guys, and these are millions of users, get 15, 20 matching jobs, right? They all are getting just lots of matching jobs every day. What they end up doing next is really, really interesting, where all of them are applying to a few jobs every single day. And these are guys who are on their way to work. So they're already working in an organization, but they are kind of they're open to kind of looking out and applying to these jobs where the intent, so my understanding was that the intent is so poor on the job where they don't even realize that they're applying to the job, right? Where so Naukri and LinkedIn and all these guys have done a fantastic job of easing out the process for applying for a job, right? So if all of us have kind of looked at these job boards, you've applied to it, it's literally boiled down to a click of a button. You don't need to upload your CV more than once, right? You upload it once and then you start applying to hundreds of jobs. You don't even need to log into these sites any longer. You just look at your newsletter, you click on apply, and boom, your application has gone through. What happens as a result of these millions of people applying to lakhs of jobs in the tens every single morning is that it creates a data deluge in the system. So the hiring manager who's sitting on the other end of the funnel is now inundated with tens and hundreds of new applies or new people who've applied to their jobs every single day. Right now, this process, incidentally, I was part of my this was in my very, very early days as a youngster, as a young analyst who was looking at reviewing startups. One of the startups at that point in time was this company called Jobs Ahead, where they were looking at which eventually kind of sold out to Monster, right? Very, very young startup. So at that stage, we found this really fascinating. So that, oh, they've really simplified the job of the HR manager, where now I don't need to put up a classified ad in a newspaper, aggregate the CVs, try to make sense of multiple different avenues of collecting CVs. People can just go on to Jobs Ahead and people can just go on to Naukri, and it's just so simple. However, what was simple 15 years ago has become a problem today. And it's a problem of plenty, right? Where now the HR manager has to deal with these hundreds of jobs that have landed in the inbox, right? If they subscribe to the inbox alerts, or there are a few hundred jobs on Naukri, there are a few hundred jobs on LinkedIn that they need to deal with, there are a few hundred other CVs on Indeed, and their job of going through this is monumental. If you look at it from the candidate's perspective, you will empathize with them also, because their belief is that, look, every morning I wake up and I apply to 5 jobs and I just don't hear back. I don't hear back from anyone. At best, I'm saying, I get an automated email response saying that we've received your application. And that too, not from the company. I get it from Naukri that the application was sent. Right? So it's kind of, look at the problem, it's really a problem on both ends, right? So the candidate the reason they are applying to that many jobs is that they're not hearing back from anyone. So they don't know what's happening once you click on the apply button. If you look at it from the HR manager's point of view, they're like, hang on, we put out a job and now I'm inundated with these people. When I call them up, they don't even remember that they have applied. This is something that I faced myself. Actually, it'll be good to kind of just get have you all put up a job and where people have applied, you call them up and people are like, they're struggling to remember the fact that they've applied to this job. Has anyone else faced that? I know I faced that for a certain tech role, right? So we were looking at hiring a few tech interns and I was like, hang on, what's happening? We just put up a job like a week ago, and a week later when we were asking for, like, we kind of shortlisted a few people, we put out and this is like about a year and a half ago, most people didn't even know that they had applied to this job. I just have like anyone who's faced this kind of an issue, like a simple yes or no would do on chat. Okay, so I take it as it's 50-50 so far. So okay, so it's so most people have said no, they don't face it. Okay, so maybe it was just me. Okay, so there's more who are saying yes now. So I take it as 50-50, right? What we found is that when people are applying, so we kind of did a little bit of a drill down on that because now it's a business to do it. When people apply on company websites, or people are applying through a referral, or people are applying through social media, right? They remember that they have applied to a company. When people are clicking on newsletters, right, chances are that they don't really remember what they have applied for, because they just, so this is basically a little kind of down into what's happening to our own job posting. Like, why are these people turning around and saying they've not applied? It's not a specific job board. That was quite clear. We kind of ruled that out. It's the manner in which they are applying that led to them remembering or not remembering. Our insight on that was that intent is very, very important, and we need a way to get high intent people into the screening funnel, into the shortlisting funnel, right? And we need a way to kind of get that. That is one of our early learnings in the process, right? So this is again just trying to find out. So exactly the exercise that we did, it's pretty much in line with what was there on Economic Times as well, right? So these are some of your largest companies, basically saying that in India, the four big problems we are facing in hiring is, and it's equally kind of divided, is basically sourcing, it's screening. So screening still, surprisingly, with all the digital tools available, to companies, screening still remains a problem. Surprisingly, a lot of people say that there is a skill shortage. Arokya Raj is not able to hear. Am I audible? Can someone else just say whether I'm audible or not? Or Arokya Raj, maybe it's only an issue at your end, because we just did a poll and I think people heard me, unless it's gone down now. Am I audible? Can anyone say a yes or no? Okay, great. So Arokya Raj, it could be that it's perhaps something at your end. Maybe it's the internet connection or just a setting that's gone off. Anyway, so continuing now. So surprisingly, 25% of respondents, and these are companies, these are 800 companies that they reached out to, which is a fantastic poll, say that there is a skill shortage. Our experience has been that actually, unless you're looking at very, very new fields, right? So we are working with some companies that are into, say, electronic vehicles, etc. Now, there, if someone tells me that there is a skill shortage, I think I would kind of say perhaps, right? Or if someone is working on IoT, or someone's working on embedded systems, I would say, okay, perhaps they, you're perhaps right. There is a skill shortage where we
Often,
need
a
a
lack
lot
of
more than what we
resources
have.
and expertise prevent even the most
Whoa.
high potential organizations.
Okay, sorry, what was that? Okay, I don't know where that came from. I'm just going to go back to this, right? So coming back, yeah. So unless it's a very, very niche specific skill, which is new in the market, there could be a skill shortage. But otherwise, I for one, while this is what 800 employers have said that there is a skill shortage, and these are obviously very, very experienced companies. My personal experience has been that there is no skill shortage. It is the lack of ability to define and find this shortage, right? So I don't think that there is a skill shortage. Dropouts in the process, yes. Again, my understanding of this factor, of this 20% of dropouts, is basically those guys who initially did not really have a strong intent to apply for that job in the first case, right? So they just kind of clicked on a button. They've not spent any time understanding the role. They've not spent any time researching the company. They clicked on a role, they got shortlisted, they got a mail, they said, okay, what the heck, I might as well just take the call. They take the call, they realize that they are shortlisted, and then they're like, oh, hang on, I'm not that interested, right? So I think so the last two are easily kind of solvable. Even the third one, I mean, the second one, that is your screening talent, there are tools available, right? So I find it a little like hard to kind of, like, it's not a problem that can't be sorted. I know that there is a challenge, there is a big challenge in screening, there is a big challenge in sourcing, but you just need to be a little smart about it. Like, it's literally that. So anyway, so this is from Economic Times. So our understanding again on why this is happening is your hunt for actually, so let me just go back, like when we started working, right, it was fairly easy to kind of fit into a company. It was tougher to get a job because there weren't that many jobs available, but it was easier to fit into the company because the roles were fairly broadly defined, right? So if you've done management, you were either a marketing guy, or you're a finance guy, or you're an HR guy, or you're an organization development guy. Like, you had 4 5 streams, and you could kind of fit into these companies. When companies were looking for people, it was very straightforward. If a company is a premier company, they would go into the premium business schools. If they were looking for a marketing function, they would just look at someone with, say 5 years of experience in marketing, has gone into a premier B school, and boom, you're done. Like, that's all that matters, because every organization at that level is roughly dealing with the same kind of process. They're dealing with the same kind of they're dealing with the same kind of market. Their systems are the same. Their level of sophistication in digitization was broadly the same. And I'm talking of about 15, 17 years ago. Fast forward to today, right? What we see is that there are new industries coming up literally every 6 months. That's one. As a result, the type of jobs that are coming up did not exist a year ago, right? A few years ago, for example, when I started working, there was no such thing as a social media manager. We were kind of entering into the digital space, but there was no social media manager. Now we see that that is a distinct new stream within digital, right? So you have specialists in search engine optimization, you have specialists in social media, you have specialists in search engine marketing, which is distinct from search engine optimization, right? So there are new roles that are coming up, and there is a fragmentation of these roles, right? So if someone is 10 years ago, someone was looking for a social media, someone to work on search engine optimization, they'd be fairly comfortable with someone who has search engine marketing experience also. Not today. Today, they would need a specialist who does search engine optimization, right? So there's fragmentation that's happening. And hence, just, every organization, every industry is at a different level of development. So when you say that I'm looking for someone who's good at digital marketing, what a large, a large manufacturing company's understanding of what a digital marketing role demands is very, very different from what an NGO would demand, is very, very different from what a small startup in the digital space would demand. However, their process of finding these people hasn't changed in the last 15 years. So when you put up a job for a digital marketing manager, you're basically doing what was being done 15 years ago, right from the way in which you define your CV, to how you attract CVs, to how you screen CVs. You are still asking for someone for a very standardized function. Once you get in these people and you start talking to them, you start your filtering process at that stage, right? So you're putting in a lot of effort in kind of attracting people in defining the role, which is again very, very standard. You're attracting people with generic skills. You're screening people based on generic criteria. You're manually spending a lot of time in shortlisting. Only once they come to the table for an interview is when you are kind of segregating them into different sets on whether they have the skill sets or not, right? So that, we think, is at the core. Like, the environment has changed, but the tools and the process hasn't kept pace with how things are changing. So this is something that we figured was at the core of our problem, right? The quantum of data generation, and this is everything from job postings to job applications to job sites and social media, has increased, but the system to process, screen, and select has remained largely unchanged, right? So this is when we kind of look at the entire spectrum of right from employer branding to giving out the offer. We're basically doing what we did 15, 17, even 20 years ago, right? But the world really has changed. That system that Naukri put in place and Monster put in place was very, very effective. Was very. I mean, we could actually see the efficiency of that 10 years ago and 15 years ago because they made the job simple. Now, because of that, it's easy to look at Naukri and kind of filter 15, 20, 50 CVs. It's not the same when you're dealing with 500 CVs, 500 applicants from one job post, and then you have other job boards to work with as well, right? So that was our understanding on why there is such a problem around recruitment. So what can we do about it, right? So we kind of put our heads together. We obviously have our own approach on Notch. Again, I'm not doing a sales pitch here, but so in fact, the things that I'm talking about are something that is just basically it's good practices, right? So one, start thinking differently about your job description itself, right? Let the hiring manager define the role. We've seen. We've done this kind of test as well because we had a lot of time on our hands. We're a young company with not that many clients. We're like, okay, what the hell? Let's just try and understand the market. If you just, and you can do this yourself and see if it, if you're in agreement or not. Just randomly pick a position on any job board, right? Randomly, very, very randomly. Pick a position that you understand. Copy it and just do a plagiarism check for it. You will see that in most cases, any job description that you are seeing out there is an amalgamation of snippets from different job descriptions of different companies, right? And I mean, this is something that everyone does, right? I don't know whether, I mean, it's obviously not the right thing to do, but this is something that everyone does. It's also very, very counterproductive, right? Because what you ended up doing is basically confuse the guy who's applying. And as a result, most applicants have stopped looking at JDs. They just look at the position, they read the summary. If there is a salary component, they look at that, they look at the location, and boom, they apply. That is for them reading a job description. They don't really go down the details, right? Because one, it's too long and it's just too complex, and it's all the same. So it's become a blind spot. Our method is really just scrap that, forget about the formats, forget about what kind of a structure, etc. Just go back to saying, what are we as an organization, what are we as a team trying to achieve, and write that down in simple bullet points. Then just try and write, if this is what we are trying to achieve, how does the role fit in? Right? So it's important for candidates to know, and you need to put this out. It's important for people who are looking at joining a company to say, where do you fit in the overall scheme of things? If this is the impact that we want to have, what will your role be? It's not just about being a marketing manager. It's not just about being a digital associate, right? Saying that how does the work that you do help us meet our final impact? This is this, and write it down simply in 2 lines, in 3 bullet points, right? What will you do when you come to the firm? A lot of people, when you come to the organization, a lot of people do write this, but there is so much of detail that it just gets lost, right? It's basically everything. Just write, this is what you will be responsible for, this is what you will be doing, right? And keep it simple. Just keep it to a few bullet points. It's most effective, right? And then finally, as a qualifying question, you can say, okay, so what is required to be successful in this role? I have seen organizations still talk about must be from a premier, write things like must be from a premier B school, must be from IIMs, etc. And I'm like, isn't that redundant already? Like, it was, the reason people would do that earlier was because there was no other way to qualify people. Today, when the world has changed, you're looking at multiple skill sets, you're looking at multiple functional expertise, you're looking at different kinds of experiences. Right? Education and where you did your MBA form or where you did your postgraduate form is just one of them, and that definitely cannot be a filtering criteria. Right? You can kind of give a little bit of weightage to that, saying that okay, if someone is from a premier business school, it may still be IIM Ahmedabad. I would kind of like to weigh this person's education on that specific account a little more, right? Because IIM Ahmedabad has a better curriculum. It is tougher to get into IIM Ahmedabad, and hence, well, I would kind of weigh this person a little more. But that cannot be a filtering criteria. That cannot be a binary saying that if you've not gone to the IIMs, I'm not even going to have a look at your CV or your application, right? So just write very simply what is required to be successful in this role. I would strongly recommend, do not write names of institutions or must have this degree and that degree. In today's world, it is meaningless. Most of the degrees that people did 5 or 7 or even 3 years ago are meaningless to someone coming into a job, right? So for example, when we look at people working with data, those kind of systems did not exist 2 3 years ago when they did the degree, but they've learned on the job. They've gone on to Coursera. They've picked up those skills. That is what is important, right? It doesn't matter whether that person had that degree or not. That's my very personal view. It's a little polemic, but it is my personal view, right? Where skills, functional experience, and the desire to kind of work always trumps where this person went to school or college. The next is define your hiring process. It seems very elementary, but please write it down. Just please draw it out on a board and get everyone in your organization, whether you are a 5-member organization or you are a 500-member organization, on board with this process. Write down the steps so everyone knows that you need to follow how sourcing is done, right? And who owns that process? How is screening done, right? Who gives the inputs for screening? For which job? How is selection done? How are we going to, are those templates ready? How am I going to ask for those questions? How is it tabulated? Please define the process. This is generally done by the HR team. In almost all cases, there is an PowerPoint that we have seen, organizations saying that yes, we do have a hiring process. It is never implemented because the functional team never follows that process, and that is the sad reality. Saying that please support the HR team to put in place this process. HR teams actually need to own this process. The third is, this is something that most people do not do. Again, try and do it. It is very effective. Lay out objective criteria for each stage and be objective about it. It is okay to change it after your initial experience, but do have that objective criteria. So for example, if you are sourcing for a job, do have some place where you can clearly mark, okay, for this job, are we going to go inbound? Are we going to go outbound? If it's organization wide, the preferable option is inbound because you just get to evaluate, you get to see a lot more candidates, right? So what kind of channels are we using? Is there a budget that we have? So these things need to be decided well in advance and keep a track of it, right? The next thing is on screening. What's my screening criteria? Like, boil it down to the last kind of bit of information that you have for screening, right? Once I've screened, if I'm looking at, saying the top, am I going to be evaluating or interviewing the top 10 people? Am I going to be interviewing the top 10% of all applicants? If I'm going to be evaluating the top 10% of applicants, who's going to be evaluating that? Do we as an organization have the bandwidth to do it, right? So all this needs to be kind of set objectively. Third is your selection. Again, what's going to be our selection criteria? Write down those interview questions, save them, document them, right? Very important. Point number 4, what are our timelines for each stage? An HR activity, because again, it's a stop and start in most cases. Requirements are always given at the last minute. There's always a scramble and timelines are thrown out of the window, right? Please follow the timeline, saying that, okay, I'm going to give, if I want to do justice to this activity, I will give, say, a week, or I will give 10 days for sourcing, right? I'm going to post these jobs on 15 front ends, right? 3 job boards, LinkedIn, social media, my WhatsApp groups, my LinkedIn groups, etc., my Facebook groups. Now, I'm going to do all of that on our company website, on our newsletter, and then I will wait for 7 or 10 days for people to apply before I start processing the first batch. Give it that time, so every activity, each stage needs this time, right? Then I'm going to be spending X number of days on screening. Do finish the screening process in that time. Then I'm going to kind of go down to the route of, my selection funnel. So whether it's over the phone or it's over interview, these are very simple things, but surprisingly people don't follow them. Right? So write it down is our advice. And you as either a functional head, a team leader, or the HR manager need to be clear on where you want to spend your time. Right? Do you want to be spending your time on manually sourcing yourself, or is there a better alternative? Is there a tool that you can buy online that sources for you? Right? Just see the cost and benefit and make those decisions. Do you want to be the one who goes and posts these jobs? Say you have 5 jobs to recruit for, who goes and posts these jobs across all front ends, or do you just want to hire an intern who can spend one day and do it for you? Right? So be clear on where you want to spend your time. If it's screening, how do you want to screen? Do you want to be the one who goes through these CV screening exercises, or can you use another solution? We've gone through the solutions. We help organizations in that as well. Saying that, is there a better way of doing it? We believe there is. Try and find that way of doing it. Our way is using data, is using algorithms. We've seen that work successfully for a lot of organizations where the HR team is no longer, is not spending, in fact, any time in CV screening. What they're spending their time is on qualitatively assessing candidates. So they're not spending their time on sourcing, they're not spending their time on screening. That time is freed up where they can actually work with hiring managers to select people. That's been our approach and our solutions. There are multiple solutions out there. Find the one that fits for you. And finally, please use data, right? Define what you want to measure, set in place the processes to capture this data, and then analyze the data. I cannot underscore how important this is, because it's once you start doing this, initially the data would seem kind of meaningless, but the minute you start doing it for multiple roles for the same, multiple positions for the same role, or you start doing it organization wide for multiple positions, you start seeing how using this data actually changes the way you look at recruitment. It is fascinating. It is powerful. It's exactly how a marketer would look at spending their time and building their brand and putting out the product. It is an equivalent of that. It's just that till now, perhaps the tools were not easily accessible. The methodology wasn't there. Today, all that is there at your disposal. Use that data. You will enjoy using it. It will just make the entire process a lot more streamlined, a lot more qualitative, and a lot more effective. Right? The few things that you can look at is very simply your outreach data. You can look at your time to hire. This is something that people do track actually. Is there anything else in the hiring process that needs improvement? So, for example, can your mass recruitment, can your inbound recruitment tell you which campus you should actually be going and doing a campus recruitment form? Is there something in the data that can give you those pointers? So figure out what you want to find out and go after that. Right. So these are the quick wins that we've seen, that we've worked with some organizations, helped them put in place. It seems to work really well. I've oversimplified it, but that's the idea over here, saying that it can be done. And that's about it. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to kind of take them now. You are happy to note down my email ID and send them to me. You can kind of send a tweet as well in case all of y'all, and if y'all are really active on Twitter, and we can be in touch. But I'm happy to take any questions now. Ada, how much of time do we have?
Okay, so I think we have gone a little over time, but in case anyone does have any questions that they would like Jojo to answer right now, I think we can wait for about 3 to 4 minutes and you could answer those. But as Jojo already mentioned that he's given his email address, which will be on the screen in front of you. And if you'd like, you can get in touch with him directly via email or Twitter. But in case, I think we can wait for about 2 to 3 minutes and see if anyone has any questions and you could answer them right now. If anyone feels that there are some questions that they may not have already been answered during the presentation today.
Cool. Okay, so should I wait for a couple of questions, or I can take this up now? from
I think you
Muralidharan.
can start taking them as and when they come. So I think we already have a question right now, so we can just keep answering them.
Okay, so that's a great one. A small organization, we want to hire social workers. We're talking about data, where the data can be obtained. Okay, so what I mean by data, Muralidhar, is basically even the question on where, say, it'll be good to understand for you, saying that, okay, if you're looking at social workers, where are these social workers, right? Do I go to campuses? Are there certain organizations? Do we have a place on our website where as soon as I put up something, people kind of reach out? All this is a data point, just so that the next time you are thinking about it, you don't need to worry about the sourcing. So this is the sourcing part of it, what you're talking about, saying that where can we attract talent? Just give me a yes or a no. Like, is that what your question is? Yes, right? So again, so if your question is where can we attract applicants or interest from social workers, that is something, that's the research that you will have to do, right? The point is, have you gone and codified this, right? Saying that, okay, we're not going to do it in a haphazard way. This is something that our organization does. We always need to work with social workers. We're going to try a few things, right? One, can you just give me a list of things that you've already tried? Two or three. Okay, so you are placing your job in Indeed. So what else? Okay, so there you go. So it comes down to our our sourcing question, that don't align yourself with any one front end, right? Because Indeed would have a certain a certain audience. They have a large number of people, but it's not like everyone's seeing that. Like, we just saw that there are 2 lakh jobs being posted every week. What do you think are the chances that people are actually seeing every job, or are seeing the jobs that are relevant to them? In my experience, minuscule. Like, it's because you're looking at them being at that point in time where the job is kind of fresh, it comes up. 2, they've got the newsletter. 3, they are looking, the right kind of people are looking for a job at that point in time. 4, they find your heading interesting. 5, after they find it interesting, they actually do something about it, right? So there are lots of front ends. I'll just pick up what Asavri is talking about. Can you suggest any other portal, preferably free of cost? Manpower budget is always limited in NGO sector. So Asavri, again, just to kind of take where Muralidhar and Asavri, both these things, it's not, these are Indeed. So let's go down to the basics of what a job board is really doing, right? A job board, the reason for a job board to exist is because organizations, they essentially came about initially to streamline the process of applying applicants. Before there were job boards, right? Before there were job portals, people applied directly to a company, and it was the responsibility of the company to be well known enough, right? To be vocal enough to go and say, okay, hey, this is what we are doing. Is anyone interested in working with us? We like these kind of people. Now, because there were way too many companies, and because it was considered expensive for a company to go and advertise on their own, they said, okay, instead of me going and trying to attract 100,000 people to apply for one position, why don't I pay a fraction of it and go to this intermediary that will get in 1,000,000 people, and out of which maybe I'll get 10 people who are interested. But instead of now me spending 10,000 rupees, I will spend 1,000 rupees, right? And that's the logic of a job board. That is why they exist. So if that is the only thing that you are doing, you are actually ruling out the other avenues that you have at your disposal for other people to apply, right? To know about, not even apply, to know about the fact that your organization exists, the fact that you are looking for them, right? You can go down to job boards. So every job board, or most job boards, have a free option, right? So Indeed has a free option. If you are in the NGO sector, etc., you have Go Barefoot is kind of free. If you reach out to social work colleges, like if you reach out to this, if you reach out to any of the universities that are offering these courses. If you go out to Azim Premji University, or if you go out to Ashoka University, etc., they are, that's your ready market, saying that okay, can we kind of put out our job in your newsletter? Go and put this up on your website. Use your social networks effectively. If you have a founding team, if you have a board, get after them to go and spread the word. If you have board members, if you have advisors, ask them to spread the job. They would happily do it. I've seen board members of NGOs, board members of organizations being very willing to go and use their personal brand on LinkedIn, on Twitter, to go and advertise the position. So some of our clients do that, and their board members, and not only the management team, is very, very happy doing it. Again, it is not only the responsibility of an HR head or an HR manager to attract candidates. It is an organizational responsibility. How you put it across to your management team, how you put it across to your board members is your responsibility. Are you giving them enough material, enough tools to make it easy for them? Right. So I would say go everywhere. In the past, we've tried doing things like a physical poster. Even though we are a digital company, we put up a physical poster in colleges to attract talent. The only difference was, instead of just putting up an email ID or a phone number, we give them a link saying that you need to apply through this link, right? Where you are taking an offline, analog, messy way of aggregating CVs, you are streamlining that into a digital application form. And now, we get applications on WhatsApp, we get applications through physical posters, we get applications through job boards. We've gone to our board and asked them to kind of spread the word. This for organizations that we're working with. It works, right? The point is to go and spread yourself as wide as possible. Your job is the processing. You need to kind of define the process and make it wide. Does that kind of address your query, Asavri and Mulidhar? And I'm happy to work with you. Again, you can just write to me with your specific queries, where you are, what kind of a firm. I'm very happy to kind of get into a call with you. If you are in Bombay, happy to meet you as well and see how we can solve this, right? Because people do want to work in the development sector. So I've heard this, and I do want to kind of highlight this, where I've heard, again, this is anecdotal evidence that is coming from this, from the sector, saying that, we find it very difficult to recruit because we don't pay high salaries. Yes, there is an element of truth. The development sector salaries in most cases are pegged a little lower. And when I say little, it's a marginal difference from the private sector, right? The belief that people don't want to work in the development sector, I think, is misplaced. A lot has changed in the last few years. People are actively seeking out these roles. It's just that they can't find you. Right? You need to be available on places where it makes it easy for them to find you. Producing a video of what your organization does is free today. Putting up photographs of what your organization looks like, writing articles about what your organization looks like is free today. You need to invest your time and energy in those things, just so that when they come onto your website, do they get a sense of what you are doing? That is important. Okay, next question. Can we get at? Okay, so Mulidhar, these are a very specific PM, a PM level salaries, etc. I would not know the answer to that. On can we get a project manager? I'm not sure whether it's a project manager or a partnerships manager or a product manager, but a PM salary at 15,000 rupees a month. The answer is I do not know. But the point is, then you do a salary benchmarking. So another interesting way in which some of our clients have kind of looked at benchmarking salaries. So one way is you are just from the sector and you really know what the salaries are out there in companies or organizations that are comparable to yours, right? The other way is which we've kind of looked at with some of our organizations, saying that okay, you describe the role in all honesty, right? Saying that this is what the role is. Obviously, you're not going to, if you're looking for a project manager and you want a really good project manager who has Six Sigma and PMP certification, chances are that they would not come in at 15,000 rupees a month. They would be closer to about 30 lakh rupees a year. And that's the difference. So you also need to be clear about what's the role and what's the expectation. Once you do that and you're clear that, okay, it is very, very defined and it's reasonable, let people apply, let them put out their expectation and let them put out their current CTC, right? What the current salary is. If you find that the people that are at the top of your consideration set, all of them are in the range of say 20 to 22,000 in the current salary, you know that your salary benchmarking needs to change, right? Again, that's a very easy simple way of using data. You can go back to your management and say, hang on, we did this exercise, we got 500 people to apply, out of which we did a blind test just looking at the requirements. We did not see what where they studied, etc. We've just gone down the requirements and we shortlisted without looking at their salaries. We shortlisted 20 people or 30 people. All those 30 people are within the salary bracket of 20 to 22,000. That gives me an indication that people in this role are earning that much outside. We looked at the organization. Some of them are exactly as what we do. Some of them are in a similar thing. I think we need to move our salary from 15,000 to 20,000. That's just a simple benchmarking exercise. After that, if the management says, no, you need to get someone at 15,000, then I think that's the job of an HR person to convince the management on showing the reality on what's out there, right? You're saying we tried with this, however, students' expectation doesn't match with the organization salary package. Again, I think I've in some way addressed that question that you do need to do a benchmarking of sorts. A traditional way of doing a benchmarking is going and asking. A simpler way today is use these tools, get the data in, and then present it to your management saying that, look, this is data from 500 applicants, right? They do not know what salary it is right now. Does that kind of help, Asabri? Murlidhar, is that useful? And I'd be happy to kind of you again, so please reach out and I'll be happy to structure this. This is interesting.
Great. So if we don't have any more questions, should we close today's session? And like you mentioned, if we'd like this conversation to carry on, you guys can also reach out to him directly. Jojo, can we close the session or would you like to answer any other questions? But I feel we've answered most and all actually.
Yes, this is great. At some point in time, if this is a practice where you get feedback, etc. I'd love to get the feedback on whether it was useful or not, whether it was too elementary. I'd kind of like to get that feedback either from you or from the participants directly.
Great. So I was just going to that. So once all the participants leave this window, they're going to be redirected to a feedback form. I'll also be sharing that form with you so you can take a look at it. And also in case anyone wants to get in touch with you, they can get in touch with you directly as well.
Great.
So I'll be bringing this session to a close. And once again, we'd really like to thank you for taking the time out to conduct this session. I think it was very informative because we did run over time, which goes to show how engrossed everyone was in the session. But thank you so much for coming today, Jojo, and helping us out, helping different organizations and different members from different organizations settle their doubts with respect to recruitments and the challenges that they face. And we'd love to have you on board again. And in case there are any other questions from anyone else's side, they can also get in touch with you as well.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Sada. And thanks everyone for participating. Lovely to be here.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.